Good day everyone, I am Renylet Baldoria, your reporter for today. So my topic is all about poetry. So now, what is poetry? Poetry is a type of literature that conveys a thought, describes a scene, or tells a story in a concentrated and lyrical arrangement of words. Poetry can be structured with rhyming lines and meter. Poems can also be free form, which follows no formal structures. So it is a type of literature that aims to evoke an emotional response in the reader through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. Poetry adds artistic style to writing. Poetry is all about vivid imagery and rhythm. It works to make us, the readers, feel something or drive us a point home. Poetry writers select their structure, rhyme scheme, pattern, and words with the purpose of arousing emotion. Although there are also poetry that is written in free verse, which does not follow rhymes and numbers for words per lines. Poetry can be written, spoken, or performed. It focuses on the aesthetics of language. It is usually composed in verse and is concerned with evoking an image or emotion. So it is the musicality of language, the rendering of abstract thoughts, ideas, and emotions rendered with words. It is pictures painted with words. Because according to Robert Frost, poetry is when an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found its words. So we have different elements of poetry. First is alliteration. It is the repetition of the same consonant sounds in a sequence of words, usually at the beginning of the word or stressed syllable. So it is a literary device that repeats a speech sound in a sequence of words that are close to each other. It uses consonant sounds at the beginning of a word to give stress to its syllable. This technique plays a crucial role in poetry by lending a strong rhythm and musical structure to any verse. It is a poet's tool to bring words together and make patterns in their writing. For example, Betty butter bought some butter, but she said the butter is bitter. So the alliterated consonant sound there is the sound of letter B. So when we say consonant, it is the letters from the alphabet except the letters A, E, I, O, and U. And the rest are all consonant. And also take note that alliteration is based on the sounds of letters rather than the spelling of the words. For example, kin and car can alliterate, but car and sight do not. Even though the first letter of car and sight is the same, they still did not alliterate because their sounds is not the same. It's different. Another example is clown and Klingon. They doesn't have to be identical. They only need to produce the same or close enough sound. So next element is assonance. It is the repetition of similar internal vowel sounds in a sentence or a line of poetry. It is in contrary with alliteration that repeats consonant sounds. Assonance features repeated vowel sounds in words that are close to each other. For example, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. So the repeated vowel sound there is the sound of A and I from the words rain, Spain, mainly, and plain. Another example is Mike's bike has bright white stripes. So from this example, the repeated vowel sound is the sound of the letter I. So let's move on to the next element, which is the imagery. Imagery is the representation of a sense, impression, feeling, or idea that triggers our imaginative reenactment of sensory experiences. Images may be visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, or gustatory. Imagery is an element of a poetry that evokes any of our five senses to create a set of mental images. It intensifies the impact of the poet's language as he or she shows us with his or her words rather than just telling us what they feel. So we have five types of imagery. First is the visual imagery. Visual imagery is the description that stimulates the eyes, specifically our mind's eye. When you or the reader visualize the colors, shapes, and forms and the aesthetics of something in the poem, then the writer is employing visual imagery. Take a look at this example. The night was black as ever, but bright stars lit up in the sky. So the author described the night as a black or in depth with color, but it brightens up through the colors of the stars in the sky. Next is auditory. Auditory imagery is a description that stimulates the ears. When you can hear sounds like nature, machinery, or someone's voice, it's because the description employed by the author or poet is auditory imagery. For example, silence was broken by the peal of the piano keys as she began practicing her training. So the sound there is the sound of the piano keys. Next is olfactory. Olfactory imagery is the description that stimulates the nose by describing the peculiarities of a scent, its richness, distinctness, or physical effect. The author transports the reader through the use of olfactory imagery. For example, I smelled the scent of a sweet hibiscus wafting through the air. The tropical smell reminds me that I was on a vacation. The scent of a sweet hibiscus is calming. So the scent of a sweet hibiscus is calming. That made her realize that she is still in a vacation. So olfactory imagery does not only arouse our sense of smell but also our memory. Let's move on to the next imagery. Gustatory imagery. Gustatory imagery stimulates the tongue. It captures a flavor's richness, acidity, earthiness, sweetness, bitterness, and harshness. Some said that this is perhaps the rarest type of image because it don't seem to dwell on taste too much, but it absolutely throws the reader into different cultures, cuisines, and histories. Take a look at this example. The candy melted in her mouth and swirls of bittersweet chocolate and slightly sweet but salty caramel blended together in her tongue. So in this example, instead of just saying that the candy is sweet, she describes every detail that she tasted from that candy. And last but not the least is the tactile imagery. It stimulates the sense of touch. Sensations like itching, stickiness, and the warmth of the sunlight. It appeals to the way our skin might feel in that moment. Tactile experiences only refer to external sensations, primarily in our skin. For example, a peculiarly perceptible prickling stillness as if a wound were healing. So the feeling of the author there is the feeling of a healing wound. Let's move on to our next element. Figurative language. Used when the writer or speaker means something other than the literal meaning of their words. So figurative language refers to the language that is not literal. It is used to build imagery and gives words more power. We have different types of figurative language. First is simile. Simile is a figure of speech that compares two separate concepts through the use of a clear connecting word such as like or as. For example, my love for you is like a red rose. So he compares his love to a red rose using the word like. Next is metaphor. Metaphor is like simile but without connecting words. It simply posits that two separate things are the same. For example, my love is a red rose. So we all know that red is an extreme color. So when he compared his love to a color red, it means that his love is true and burning. Next is synecdoche. It is a figure of speech in which a part of something stands for the whole. So in this example, ABCs, if someone mentioned ABCs, we all know that he or she is referring to all of the alphabets from A to Z. Next is metonymy. Metonymy is a kind of figurative language that refers to a situation in which one term is substituted for another. For example, lend me your ears. When someone is telling you that phrase, it doesn't mean that you will get your ears and give it to them. It means that you should pay attention on what they are saying. You should listen to them. And lastly is personification. Personification is a poetic device where animals, plants, or even inanimate objects are given human qualities. For example, the sun smiled down us. So instead of just saying the sun is brightly shining, we can use human activities to make our phrase or our work more creative and powerful. Okay, moving on to the next element, the rhyme. It is the repetition of identical or similar concluding syllable in different words. More often at the ends of the lines, rhyme is predominantly a function of sound rather than spelling. Thus, words with the same vowel sounds rhyme. So, rhyme is the use of corresponding sounds in lines of writing. This can occur at the end lines or in the middle. To create a rhyme, the piece of writing has to have two or more similar sounding words. Take a look at this example. Way down south where bananas grow, a grasshopper stepped on an elephant's toe. The elephant sounded with tears in his eyes. Pick on somebody your own size. So the first and the second line there has rhyming sounds, the grow and the toe, as well as with the third and fourth line, the eyes and the size. Although they differ in spelling, but their sound is close to each other, so they are rhyming words. So under rhyme, we have rhyme scheme. It describes the pattern of end rhymes. It is mapped out by noting patterns of rhyme with small letters. The first rhyme sound is designated A, the second becomes B, and the third C, and so on. So, rhyme scheme is the pattern of rhyme that comes at the end of each verse or line in poetry. It changes line by line, stanza by stanza, or can continue throughout the poem. The patterns are encoded by the letters of the alphabet. For example, the rhyme AABB means the first and second lines of a stanza rhyme with each other, and the third lines rhyme with the fourth line and the B's rhyme together. For example, I do not like this one so well. All he does is yell. I will not have this one about. When he comes in, I put him out. This one is quiet as a mouse. I like to have him in the house. So the first two lines rhyme with each other. Same with the third and fourth, the letter B, and the fifth and sixth lines. Moving on to the next element, we have the rhythm. Rhythm is the term used to refer to the recurrence of stressed and unstressed sounds in poetry. So it can be described as the beat and the pace of a poem. It can help to strengthen the meaning of words and ideas in a poem. So rhythm is the recurring movement of sound or speech. Example of rhythm is the rising and falling of voice. It creates a tone for the poem, and it can generate emotions to enhance ideas. Next is we have the tone and the mood. Tone is the author's attitude toward their subject matter, while the mood is the overall feeling it conveys to the reader. So tone is mainly the perspective of the author, what the author thinks and feel about that something, while the mood is an emotion or mental state that a person is able to feel while reading the poem, how the reader feels in a certain emotion while reading it literary piece or while reading a poetry. Next, we have the stanza. Stanza is a group of lines set off by space which usually has a set of pattern or meter and rhyme. So stanza is the main building block of a poem or poetry. It is composed of lines that relate to a similar thought or topic. It is like the paragraph in a prose. Stanza is a set of lines that are grouped together in a poem. It is separated from other stanzas in order to divide and organize a poem. So we have 10 basic forms of stanza in poetry. First is the monostage. It is a one-line stanza. It is also refers to a one-line poem. It expresses a complete thought. For example, thin air, my mind is gone. Next is the couplet. This stanza is made up of two lines. Since it has only two lines, it must rhyme. Take a look at this example of a couplet stanza. Animal is what you should be to spend your life widely sin-free. Multiple sexual mates is fascination. To the beast, it is just procreation. By stealing, you can't be blameless. Beasts still remain sinless. Next is the tercet. Tercet has three lines. We can use tercet as a whole poem. Haiku is a perfect example of a tercet poem. Take a look at this example of an haiku. An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. Next is the quatrain. There is no limit to this stanza of four lines. It can rhyme or not, have regular meter or not. It is the very common stanza form. Example. When my mother died, I was young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, weep, weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in sooth I sleep. Next is quatrain. It has five lines. It has fixed syllable scheme per line. Limerick poem use the quatrain stanza. Take a look at this example. It is an excerpt from a poem called The World by Jerome Herbert. It applies the quintet stanza form. Love built a stately house where fortune came, and spinning fancies. She was heard to say that fine her cobwebs did not support the frame, whereas they were supported by the same. But wisdom quickly swept them all away. The pleasure came, who, liking not the fashion, began to make balconies, terraces, till she had weakened all by the alteration. But reverend lost, and many a proclamation, reformed all the land with the menaces. Moving on to the sixth type of stanza, we have the sestet. So, in sestet, there is no limit. You may rhyme or not. So, take a look at this example from the excerpt of the first three stanzas of Elizabeth Bishop's poem known as Sestina. September rain falls in the house. In the failing light, the old grandmother sits in the kitchen with child, beside the little marble stove, reading the jokes from the almanac, laughing and talking to hide tears. She thinks that her equinoctial tears, the rain that beats on the roof of the house, were but foretold by the almanac, but only known to a grandmother. The iron kettle sings on the stove. She cuts some bread and says to the child. Next is the septet. Septet has 7 lines. As long as the stanza has 7 lines, it is a septet, whether it has a rhyme scheme, meter, or not. It is often used in long poems. It can also stand alone as a whole poem. Take a look at this example, excerpted from Edgar Allan Poe's poem called Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever deceive my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Moving on to the 8th type of stanza, we have the octet. Octet has 8 lines in any meter and rhyme scheme. It can also stand as a whole poem. The ottava rima is a type of octet stanza form often found in Italian literature and used to praise heroic deeds. For example, is this first stanza excerpted from the Among School Children by William Butler Yeats. I walk through the long schoolroom questioning. A kind old nun in a white hood replies. The children learn to chipper and to sing, to study, reading books and history, to cut and sew, beneath in everything. In the best modern way, the children's eyes, in a momentary wonder stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public. Next is the 9-line stanza. We have 2 types of 9-line stanza, the nonet and the Spenserian. Nonet derived from 9. It is recognized as a standalone poem made up of 9 lines. The first line of nonet contains of 9 syllables, the second 8, 37, and it continues like that until the last line, which has one syllable. Take a look at this example of a nonet line stanza. Amazing, you're growing inside me. Adventures and others begin. Flutters and tummy movements. Responding to my touch, kick from the inside. Alive and kicking. You are a marble veil. Next is the Spensaria stanza. It has a rhyme scheme of AB, AB, BC, and BCC. Take a look at this example excerpted from the Spenser's poem The Fairy Queen. But on his breast a bloody cross he bore, the dear remembrance of his dying lord. For those sweet sake that glorious badge he wore, and dead as living ever him adored. Upon his shield the like was also a scored, for sovereign hope, which in help he had. Right faithful true he has in deed and word. But of his cheer did seem to solemn said. And lastly is the design. It is derived from the French literature dis means 10. This stanza form has 10 lines. It can also stand alone as a complete poem. Take a look at this example excerpted from the long poem of Jean Kiat's Ode on a Grecian Urn. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter, therefore your soft pipes play on. Not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit deities of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not live. Thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss. Thou winning near the goal yet, she cannot fade. Though thou hast not thy bliss, for forever wilt thou love and she be fair. So those are the different elements of poetry. Let us move on to the importance of poetry. First, poetry can depict historical events. Throughout the history, poetry has been important because it gives us historical representation in what previous generations found beautiful, important, and profound. It shows us the words and concepts from the past. Poets in the past may have written a poem after a big event that had happened or occurred, and by reading their poems, we can see how this certain event affects our living now. Next is poetry captures the urgency of the moment in the life of the writer. Poetry is real. Real people have written it to express real emotions that is normally hidden. Poets write to show that people have felt certain things before someone else may experience it at the other time. So poetry allows us to see beyond the surface. Sometimes this is done through metaphors and others abstract ways which cause you to really think. Another is poetry is the deep and powerful expression of human condition. Poetry encompasses all emotions, all modes of living. It can be mourning or celebration, song or scream, revelation or denial. Poetry puts our observations, opinions, and trains of thoughts out in the open. Next, poetry can make it easier to step in the shoes of someone else. So this can also prevent misunderstanding. Through poetry, we can understand others' perspective and emotions. We can develop our sense of empathy. Through the emotions that we feel while reading a poem, we can relate to the author's experiences. And lastly, poetry allows children and adults alike to explore the English language by mixing words in sentences to find the right fit to create a sense of rhythm and flow. Poetry is important because it tries to render things that aren't easy to express by words. It does by making use of attributes of language which aren't commonly seen to instill deep thought. Poetry uses words as doors to many possibilities. It carries our imagination or stirs new dreams. So those that I had mentioned are only some of the importance of poetry in our life. So let's move on to poetry in contemporary literature. What is poetry under contemporary literature? Contemporary poetry is a style of poetry that follows a specific series of traits and literary tools. Inconsistent meter varies upon standard time rhyme. Poets writing in this style allows their ink to place a unique sense of self upon words, making every poet's story special. So contemporary poetry favor free verse, which employs no rhyme or poetic meter. By the term contemporary, it is considered poetry written within our lifetime and includes poems written approximately from the mid-20th century. So contemporary poetry often share similar themes and writing styles. Some of the common themes of contemporary poems are love, family, and death. Contemporary poets often leaves the readers to draw his own conclusions and meanings. So we have here different contemporary poets and their poems. First is Mary Oliver. She is an American poet who has won the National Book Award and Publisher Prize. She writes in a simple, direct way, and many of her poems paint a close relationship with nature. So take a look at one of her poems entitled At the Black Water Pond. And next is The Storm. So most of her works is all about nature. Next is Ted Hughes. Ted Hughes was a poet, playwright, and short story writer. One of his best works was published in a 1917 titled The Crow. There were series of story poems which discuss issues of death and overcome death. So one of the series of his famous The Crow is this entitled The Crow's Fall. So moving on to Maya Angelou. So her real name is Margaret Johnson. She was born on April 4, 1928. She is one of the America's leading female contemporary poets. Maya Angelou had a turbulent childhood, but she was able to retell her experiences with great poignancy and effect in her book. I Know Why the Cage Brings Sing. It is a collection of stories from her childhood. Despite the iniquities of her life as a child, she has been able to provide a positive message of humanity and hope. She said that the honorary duty of human being is to love. One of her poem is this entitled A Conceit. And last but not the least is W.S. Merwin. He was born in New York City in 1927. Merwin is the author of more than 15 books of poetry. One of his works is this entitled Odysseus. So they are only some of the famous contemporary poets. So let's move on to the poem of Jane Hirshfield, The Promise. Who is Jane Hirshfield? Jane Hirshfield was born in New York City on February 24, 1953. She is an award-winning essayist, poet, translator, and editor. Jane Hirshfield is the author of several collections of verses, many of which are influenced by her Zen Buddhist practice and her knowledge of classical Japanese verse. So let us read the poem The Promise. Stay, I said to the cut flowers. They bowed their heads lower. Stay, I said to the spider, who fled. Stay, leaf. It reddened, embarrassed for me and itself. Stay, I said to my body. It sat as a dog does, obedient for a moment, soon starting to tremble. Stay, to earth, of reverend valley meadows, of fossiled escarpments, of limestone and sandstone. It looked back, with a changing expression, in silence. Stay, I said to my loves. Each answered, always. This is the poem The Promise by Jane Hirshfield. It is a free verse poem with 6 stanzas and 22 lines. Each stanza seemed to have different focus to the preceding one, and all examine the idea of change and disappointment. Being in free verse, Hirshfield can place words with a freedom drawn from not needing to follow a set of rhyme scheme or meter. The best example of this freedom comes in the last line of the poem, which is the single word, always. So let us examine the different elements present in the poem. First is the form. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a free verse poem with 6 stanzas and 22 lines. It also have alliteration from the line soon starting to tremble. So I mentioned earlier that alliteration is the repeated consonant sound. So the repeated consonant sound in that line is the sound of letter S. We also have repetition of the word stay, that almost of each stanza have this word. Next is the figurative language. We have simile. From the fourth stanza, second line, it sat as a dog. It is considered as a simile because it uses the connecting word as. Second is personification. We can find the evidences in the first and third stanza. We have the to cut flowers, they bow their heads lower. So, bowing is a human activity. And stay, live, it reddened, embarrassed for me and itself. So, being reddened and being embarrassed is a feeling felt by a human. Next, the mood is disappointment because it is the reflection on how things in the poet's life seem to drift away and leaving her behind, even if she pleaded them to stay. She asked objects such as flowers, spiders, and even her own body to stay, but in the end, they always leave or change. And lastly is the theme. The theme is nothing stays. Even those that you trust the most, the one that you love, even yourself, you cannot stay. We do not have control over living or changing. Whether we like it or not, everything change. Because that is the only thing that is constant in this world, and no one can do something about it. So that ends my reports. I hope you have learned something from me today. Once again, I am Renylet Baldoria, your reporter for today.